Hello everybody and welcome to Chess with Simon and Chewy and Daisy. Okay, this is a video for people who are absolute beginners at chess, people who have never lifted a piece in anger or in friendship. This is just to explain literally the object of the game, how the pieces move, the very, very basics, and hopefully we're going to make it a bit fun too. So basically the way the chess works is each person is in charge of their own army, their own set of pieces. Chewy doesn't like the limelight. He's a modest dog. Everyone's in charge of their own set of pieces, okay? And all the pieces move differently. The object of the exercise, the object of the game, is to capture the opponent's king. That's what the game is setting out to do. Each piece moves differently, so we're just going to quickly go through how the pieces move. So this is called a pawn. Some people refer to it as a prawn, but its really proper name is a pawn. Now, the pawns move forward. They usually move forward by one square. One square, one square, one square, one square. On the first move, they can move two squares. So when they move from their starting position, they move two squares. But they can also move one square on the first move if the person wants to. It's a matter of choice. So you can either move your pawn one square or two squares on the first move. After that, just one square. Now, when the pawns capture, they capture diagonally. So in this position, the white pawn can capture the black pawn, and in this position, the black pawn can capture the white pawn. So the pawns capture diagonally, but they move forward like that. They just move like that. Now the pawns are the only piece that capture in a different way to the way they move. For all the other pieces have defined moves, and then they just capture if they land on the piece that's on that square. One last special move with the pawn is called en passant. So if the pawn is here, and then the black pawn moves two squares on its first move, the white pawn is able to take it like this, as if it had only moved one square. So this is called the en passant rule. So if it looks like this, if the black pawn moves two squares, the white pawn can take like this. But usually the pawn has to take and land on the square where the old pawn used to be. And en passant only happens on the first move. It can't happen here, for instance. It only happens when the opponent's pawn makes its first move. Also with pawns, they have one other special superpower, which is when they get to the back, they can turn themselves into any other piece. So if the game looked like this, let's get these pieces off the board. If the pawn took one more step, it could come to the very end of the board, and then it can turn itself into anything it wants to. A rook, a knight, a bishop, or a queen. So that is the pawn superpower, but it's really hard work to get it there, because of course black will do everything that she can to stop the pawn getting through. So that's how the pawn moves. Let's go on to the knight. So the knight looks like a little horse. This is a knight from my first chess set. Actually, I think it might be my second chess set. But I used to play every night with my father. We played 2 games every night. He always won. It was the time of the day I look forward to most. And actually, I carried this chess set with me my whole life, everywhere I moved. But the board slowly fell apart. I've got like these pieces left, a bishop, a couple of pawns. They mean a lot, okay? One of them escaped. They mean a lot. Anyway, the knight looks like a horse. The knight moves in an L shape. So it can move 2 squares forward and 1 to the side. 2 squares forward and 1 to the side, or 2 squares backwards, 1 to the side, or 1 square backwards, 2 to the side. So it can move in an L shape in any direction. For instance, in this square, on this square, the knight can move to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares. It can move to any of these places in an L shape. From the corner, this knight can move to just 2 squares, 1, 2, both of those in an L shape. The knight also has a superpower, and its superpower is that it can jump over any other pieces, either your own pieces or your opponent's pieces. So from here, the knight can move to there, or it can move to here. So because it's a little horsey, it can jump, and it can jump over anything else. So that's the knight. And again, it just captures if there's a piece on the square that it's moving to. So right here, the knight captures the opponent's knight. Next up is the bishop. So the bishop moves in diagonals. So the bishop from here can move to all of these squares, all of these squares, all of these squares, and all of these squares. It moves in a diagonal. So each bishop always stays on the same colour because the diagonals are all the same colour. So this bishop is always on the light squares, light squares, light squares, light squares. This bishop is always on the dark squares, dark squares, dark squares. So that's the pawn, that's the knight, and that's the bishop. Next is the rook, and that's the one that looks like a castle. Although in some languages, actually, this translates as chariot. So the rook, like a good old chariot, moves in long, straight lines. It's a sideways moving expert. So the rook can start from here, it can move to there, then next move, it can move to there, then next move, it can take the bishop, then next move, it can take the knight. So the rook moves in a straight line, not on the diagonals, but straight down. These are called the files, and then these are called the ranks, across the ranks. That's the rook. So what we're left with now is the queen and the king. In some ways, you should say the most important pieces, although in a sense, all the pieces fit together in a sort of beautiful system. The queen is the most powerful piece. So the queen can choose. She can either make a rook's move, straight lines, straight lines, straight lines, or she can make a bishop's move, diagonal, diagonal, diagonal. So the queen has so many squares she can choose to go to. If we take all these other pieces off, take them off, from this central square, the queen can move to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. I hope I've got that right. She can move to loads of squares because she can either choose to be a rook or a bishop depending on what she wants, how she feels, or what the person in control wants. So that's how the queen moves. The king moves a bit like the queen, but he can only move one square at a time. So he can move from here, he can move to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He can move forwards, backwards, side to side, or diagonals, but just one square at a time. So from here, he can move to 8 squares. From the corner, he can move to 3 squares. And this is important because the object of the game is to capture your opponent's king. That's what the game's all about. And so the king's quite feeble and quite slow. He can't really run away very quickly. So you've got to look after your king. You've got to guard your king. So let's talk about capturing your opponent's king. The first thing to say is, if someone is attacking your king, so this rook is attacking the king, it's threatening to take the king. And when that happens, the king is in check. And so on white's next move, white has to do something about that. So white can move the king away so the rook can't take anymore. Or he can move another piece, say this knight. He can move a knight in front to stop the rook attacking. So now the rook can take the knight, but he can't take the queen. If the king is being checked by a knight, there's no way of moving a piece in the way because knights can leap over things. So even if you surround the king with other pieces, it doesn't matter, it's still check because the knight can leap. So in this case, if you've got a check from a knight, you just have to move the king. Anyway, if you're being checked, you've got to get straight out of check. If you're in check and you can't get out of check, it's checkmate and the game is over. So in this position, it's checkmate. The queen is attacking the king. Queen's going to take the king next move. The king can't run here because then the rook will take. It's all over. Unless white has a piece here that he can put in the way. If you put a piece in the way, it's not checkmate. But if you don't have anything to block the check, this is checkmate. Checkmate means that black wins. So in a sense, that's how you win the game. Now there's one more move. The last move is called castling. So this is the only move in which you move 2 pieces. So let's look at this. She was just jumping up on the couch. If it's white's move here, and this is a bit of a strange position, but it doesn't matter. If it's white's move, white can castle. And when white castles, he moves his king 2 squares. It's the only time you can move your king 2 squares and move the rook 1 square. And this gets the king to safety. He's castled behind his pawns and he's safe. The king can also castle on the queen side. So in that case, the king moves 2 squares, the rook comes over the top, and that's castling on the queen side. So castling is a really helpful move, and it's something that we encourage and is a good thing to do reasonably early in the game to get your king safe. There's a number of times you're not allowed to castle. You're not allowed to castle if you're in check. You have to deal with a check. You're not allowed to castle if you've moved your king or your rook in the game. And you're not allowed to castle if a piece is checking a square you want to go over. So here, you can't castle because the rook would take your king. And even here, you can't castle because the king is going over a square on which he would be taken. So he's going over a square on which he would be in check. So if the king is in check, or if a piece is checking a square the king would go over, you're not allowed to castle. The game is won by checkmate. There are other ways of winning the game. One way of winning the game is if your opponent just resigns and says they don't want to play anymore. You know, they know that they're going to lose and they just decide to give up and resign, which is fine. And it's often right to resign if it's really obvious who's going to win. Although it's your game, you should choose when and if you resign. The second way you can lose is just to run out of time. So some people just play for fun without time, and that's completely fine, and that's the way I used to play with my dad. But some people play with time. So if you're playing, maybe you can have a blitz game where you've got 5 minutes to play all of your moves. If you run out of time, you lose. Maybe you can have a game against a computer when you have 30 seconds to make each of your moves. Or sometimes people play correspondence chess on the internet where they take 3 days to make a move or 7 days to make a move. So you have 3 whole days to think about your move. But if you don't move within 3 days, then you've lost the game. So some chess games have a timed element. So that's winning chess, but how do you draw at chess? There's a number of ways to draw at chess. One of the ways is that you just repeat the position a number of times. So if you're just going backwards and forwards, say it's like this. I mean, let's take a bunch of pieces off, and let's just do this. So this is the sort of thing, and black just goes check, white moves there, check, white moves there, check, white moves there, check. If the position is repeated 3 times, it's a draw, because clearly it's not going anywhere. And one version of that is perpetual check. If one side can just keep checking the other, and he can't get out of it, that's always going to be a draw because it could go on forever. Another way it can be a draw is if there's not enough material on the board to finish the game. So here, this is a draw, because all anybody has got is a king. So there's no way you can actually checkmate. But even here, with a knight and king against a king, there is no way a knight and king can trap the king and checkmate it. So this is a draw, this is a draw, you know, you've got a bishop each. There's various ways when there's so much material that's gone off the board, you just call it a draw. And actually, if 2 people feel the game's heading for a draw, they can agree a draw. 2 other ways you can draw. One is called stalemate. So if it's white's move, and white cannot move, but it's not check, that is a draw. So in this position, it's white's move, white has no squares to go to, can't go there, can't go there, can't go there, because the queen will take, but it's not check. In that position, that is a draw. And black's very sad about that, because actually with the queen, he could have checkmated. But if it ends up as a stalemate, that's really, you know, awkward, and in some cases frustrating if you've got more pieces than your opponent. The last way it can be a draw is if there are 50 moves without a pawn moving. And, you know, then in that situation, sometimes you're just pushing each other around the board, even if the position isn't repeating. But, you know, that's quite rare, and you don't often see that on the board. So that's how you win the game. That's how you draw the game. Let's look briefly just at how you set up the pieces. Let's look at how you set them up. So the way you set them up is firstly a row of pawns in front. So firstly, let's even just talk about the board. So if I'm playing white, I have the white piece on my right. That's the white square. I have the white square on my right. So if I'm playing the white pieces, I have the white square on the right, I have the black square on the left. You have a row of pawns going across in front. As my dad always taught me, behind this, you have the queen on her own colour. So the white queen goes on white, the black queen goes on black. Then you have the king next to her. And then basically what happens is bishops, these are the religious people, so they're next to the rulers. Knights on the outside, rooks on the outside. And then of course black is the same way, all of the pawns in front. Knights, bishops, rooks, behind, like this. Now there is a version of chess called Fischer 960, where you juggle the position of the pieces. You might see people playing this, where the actual order of the pieces gets juggled, and that stops people learning openings, and that's kind of very interesting and very different. But that's just kind of what we call a chess variant. It's a special version of chess. But in normal chess, this is how we set the pieces up. And I think that's everything you need to know. So good luck. You know, people, you take it in turns to move. White moves first. You know how all the pieces move. You know what it takes to win and what it takes to lose. So most important of all is to enjoy your chess. I'm going to ask my camera person if she's got any more questions. Any questions?
No questions.
She's got no questions. She was eating a spring roll before, which was causing some problems, but she's not eating a spring roll anymore. She's actually watching me. So no questions from the camera person. But one other thing I think which is often polite in chess, and something we encourage, is if you've got a dog, it's often nice to give it a piece of ham, just at the end. Because dogs really like ham. Look at that. They love it. And I think cats quite like ham too. And we don't want to discriminate between dogs and cats. So if there's a little cat on the back of the chair, look at that, a bit more tender. Yeah, it's yours. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, comment, do anything that you want to do. Thank you so much.